12 October 1946, Hanover. My father's papers still decide who eats. Short sentence. Sharp sentence. Dangerous sentence. A sentence that could not be spoken openly in 1946 without the House listening, without neighbors looking away, without occupying officers making a note in a blue ledger. It was written in a small notebook by a young man named Karl Lang. He wrote it in ink that bled when rain hit the thin paper. He wrote it on the day his father returned from a Spruchkammer hearing with a paper badge pinned to his chest and a job offer on the county clerk's desk. The statement is the thesis of this story. It is the single-minded line around which everything else turns. It is both accusation and accounting. It summons rubble and ration cards, interrogation reports and municipal ledgers, the hunger winters, the expulsions, the displaced persons, camps downriver from the railway yards, and the slow arithmetic by which a republic reconciled the need for order with the desire for justice. It condenses a lifetime of small, bureaucratic violences and compromises into a personal ledger. It names the family's fate in one brittle clause. The first paragraphs must be brief. They must hit. Then the filmic narration opens. Then archives do their work. 1945, the city lay open. Dust everywhere. The mathematics of rubble. On 8 May 1945, the city gates of Hanover stood half-collapsed. Railway houses were missing roofs. Tram lines were twisted into ribbons. The river banks bore pools of oil and frozen refuse. The British occupation column entered from the west. They arrived with maps and curfews and a protocol for everything. The curfew posters were strict. The posters said, "No lights after 11 p.m., checkpoints at every bridge, all gatherings banned." The mathematics of fear was simple. A curfew multiplied the risk of an encounter. Anna Muller's oral history begins with a list of dates. 9 May 1945, she says, "We were on the roofs pulling down chimneys. The Tremmerfrauen had come with wire baskets." She was 30 in 1945. She had cleared 2,300 cubic feet of brick in the first winter. She counted like anyone in that month counted calories, because counting made the world legible again. Her hands were raw. The men who had come back from fronts walked like ghosts and talked little. There were missing names, missing faces. The mathematics of absence. 1 husband, 2 sons dead. A sister's letter that stopped in March 1943. Rubble was not only brick and timber, it was also records. City registries arrived at piles of damp paper. The municipal archive on Stentorplatz had been shot through by shelling. Still, the ledger books were legible in places. Heinrich Lange's office had a desk drawer full of forms, lists of labor assignments, transport manifests, work card ledgers. He had been a municipal building inspector. He had been a party member. He had been, in truth, a man who had learned how administrations move people by columns and check marks. He had designed a rota for housing forced laborers in the textile factory on Lindenstrasse. He had signed requisitions that sent men and women to work details in other districts. His handwriting appears in a dozen Spruchkammer files. His signatures were small and contained. The Allied occupation reports in 1945 described the city as both prey and machine. A British Civil Affairs report dated 3 June 1945 reads, "Hanover, administrative staffs remain. Municipal offices still contain personnel who were active under the previous regime. The machinery of day-to-day civic life continues and will be necessary to maintain order." The report lists names. It lists salaries. It lists one remarkable fact: the machine needs operators. The arithmetic of food followed. The winter of 1946-47 fell into history as the hunger winter. Coal was scarce. The railways moved shrapnel and convoys slow through the broken country. Ration cards were introduced or reintroduced in zones. People stood in lines that grew long in the dawn like a river of ragged coats. The black market's mathematics was simple. A loaf of bread could be obtained for 2 coupons and a packet of cigarettes. Cigarettes were the small, anonymous currency of the ruined city. A cigarette bought silence, wrote a British intelligence summary from October 1946. A cigarette bought entry. Cigarettes bought pork if you had the right friend. Carl remembers his mother emptying cupboards to join queues. He remembers the arithmetic of the family's ration card. He remembers the day 6 January 1947, when the priest came to the house and took the family's last sugar ration for the funeral of a neighbor. He remembers how the father saved the cigarettes by the box, a folded piece of paper wrapped around each packet with a name. Those names were the poor mathematics of barter. They were also the private ledgers of shame. In the father's pocket were lists, short, coded entries of allocations, of labourers sent to the factory, of rooms requisitioned, and, somewhere, a column of new names that Carl would later find in the municipal drawer and translate into the language the town preferred: records, files, reasons. Denizification. The questionnaires and the categories. The mathematics of guilt. Denizification began with a stack of papers called Fragebogen. They were questionnaires that asked where you had been in 1933, where you were in 1939, who had signed your membership card, whether you had denounced someone, whether you had profited from Aryanization. The forms arrived in the summer and autumn of 1945 with an austere instruction: fill them out truthfully. Heinrich filled his in with ink that trembled. He wrote, "Party member since 1933, member of several municipal committees, supervisory duties." "I followed orders," he wrote, in German so blunt it was unadorned. "I cared for housing assignments." He did not write names of those he had reassigned. He did not write the reason a Latvian labourer had been moved to a detail near the railway yards, nor the fact the man never returned. The Sprüchkammer hearings were theatre and arithmetic. Each case passed through a small chamber where a town clerk and 2 appointed judges read a form and compared it against witness testimony. They sorted people into 5 categories: I Hauptschuldige, major offenders; in der Thirde Belastet offenders; 3 Belastet offenders; 3 Minder Belastet, lesser offenders; IV Mittellastet, followers; V Entlastet, exonerated. The words carried a weight beyond their ink. They determined jobs, fines, sentences. A British military government memo of 12 March 1946 admitted already the system's limits. The need for local administrative competence obliges us to re-employ many who have questionable pasts. The Sprüchkammern, therefore, must balance the demands of justice with those of maintaining order. The mathematics of guilt had a practical algorithm. Testimony against a municipal clerk might be 1 sheet. An employer's testimony might add 2 more. If a man had been a party member before 1939 and then had been an officer in a civil corps, he was at risk of being categorized as belasted or worse. But the arithmetic of utility subtracted heavily from the arithmetic of blame. If the man could run the waterworks, it was often cheaper in political currency to keep him on payroll and slap him with a fine than to replace him with a novice who would take months to learn the valves. Heinrich was sentenced as a Mitläufer in a Sprüchkammer hearing on 2 October 1946. The file, Sprüchkammer Hanover, case number 7643, contains minutes, witness statements, and the final judgment. The verdict, fine and temporary suspension from official duties, but the file also notes that the municipal office would require the man's knowledge of building codes. The sentence included a clause that permitted rehabilitation upon the demonstration of civic utility. He was allowed to take the equivalent of a civil service exam. He failed it twice. He passed it on the 3rd attempt, after a friend at the Landrat's office put the exam paper aside. Millions of Fragebogen piled up in basements and facades. The Bundesarchiv holds stacks that run to meters. The British report of 1946 records, in this region, the Spruchkammern have processed, as of October, several 100,000 files. The majority are classified as Mitlaufer or Enklastate. Few are sentenced to long imprisonment. The Book of Denazification is a book of gradations. It is a book of gradations. It is a book whose majority line reads in small print, "Who can we afford to purge?" The arithmetic of settlement, when people moved, their numbers multiplied pressure. The East emptied from 1944 into 1946. The Panzer lines and the freezing seas of flight translated into a human geography of movement. From Silesia, from Pomerania, from East Prussia, approximately 12 million people fled west or were expelled. They arrived in towns that had no spare rooms. A transport arrived at Hanover Hauptbahnhof on 14 September 1945 with 1,200 people from Breslau, and they arrived with one suitcase. They arrived with wooden boxes nailed shut. They arrived with silverware wrapped in rags. The city had to find beds. The arithmetic of scarce rooms is basic. One municipal apartment is given to one family. Now place an expulsé family of 6, 2 suitcases, and a baby in that equation. Who loses the room? Who gives up the attic? There were lists. The municipal office filled them. Heinrich wrote names. He shifted people. He requisitioned a Red Cross storehouse and allocated a room in a half-demolished hotel to 12 people. The file marks this as action. The file does not mark it as reconciliation. The tension between locals and newcomers is visible in the municipal correspondence. A letter from a local farmer, dated 9 November 1945, pleads with the Burgermeister. "We cannot feed more mouths. The new people take our straw. My son is hungry." The newcomers talk strange of lost farms and say they are entitled. The regional administration replied on 23 November. "We will allocate emergency rations. We will assign work details where possible." The arithmetic of jobs means one extra worker for a demolished mill is one less bowl of porridge for a local. The expulsions were not just a strain on food, they were also a moral and mnemonic displacement. The newcomers carried with them memories of lost property and violent expulsions that required histories, claims, and political representation. They organized into Landsmannschaften, pressure groups that fought for restitution. The public ceremonies of the 1950s, flags, veterans' bands, plaques, drew their energies. The public rhetoric of victimhood, distributed among many parties, altered the political measure of the immediate past. A nation that had been both perpetrator and victim recast itself by emphasizing the latter. Contact with victims, displaced persons camps, and the bloody human mirror. Near the railway yards and the railroad sidings, the Allied military authorities established DP camps. Bergen-Belsen, which had been a Nazi concentration camp, became, in August 1945, a DP camp for Jewish survivors. Feldafing, a former Nazi youth schooling site outside Munich, held Jewish DPs. Many of these camps abutted German towns. Hanover's DP clusters were visible downriver along the Lane. The townspeople could not avoid them. Occupied Germany thus became a place where perpetrators, victims, and bystanders sometimes shared the same city air. German families supplied eggs to canteens near DP kitchens. A British intelligence dispatch from December 1945 notes, "Instances are reported where local residents have brought clothing and tobacco to DP camps, often unaware of the identity of recipients." At other times, there are clear tensions when DPs meet the men who once rounded up their families. The dispatch lists a case in which a former forced laborer recognized an old neighbor at a market and attempted to fetch the police. One of the most consequential moments of post-war contact is described in a bundle of oral histories. "I met a woman in 1946 who looked like a ghost," says Elizabeth Roth, who had been a young clerk at the municipal registry. She was asking for her brother for a record. She had been told her brother had been sent to Poland. Elizabeth had, as clerical duty required, photocopied a transport manifest and passed it up the chain. The manifest contained a list of names I could read now. In the Bundesarchiv, the handwriting of a municipal clerk, a round signature, a stamp. That stamp indicated an order for transfer in 1942. For many Germans, these discoveries were moments that demanded a moral inventory. For many others, they were files that could be misread, misremembered, or folded away. Strategies of denial are catalogued in testimony as carefully as acts of recognition. Some Germans told themselves they had known nothing. Others rephrased past actions as obedience to necessity. The files show both. A testimony from a Sprechkammer hearing recurs, "I cannot remember the name. I signed for transports. I thought it was a work detail." The arithmetic of plausible deniability is small but abundant. A name without a context can be narrated into ignorance. An administrative box-checked transport can be read as labor transfer if you wish. Thus, the bureaucratic form becomes a locus of interpretive theft. The question then becomes quantitative as well as moral. How many of those who signed forms were true camp functionaries? How many were simply clerks trying to keep the city's water on? Allied intelligence summaries of 1947 contain spreadsheets that attempt to quantify culpability. One American report bluntly states, "It is impossible to prosecute on the scale required. The calculation is cold. Prosecution consumes resources. Stability costs less if you reuse the existing personnel." The arithmetic favors bookkeeping over wholesale purges. The economy shifts. Marshall Plan arrivals and the currency reform of 1948 turn the tide. The currency reform of June 1948 is a hinge. Overnight, the black market that traded in cigarettes and barter found its legs shaken. The Deutsche Mark arrived. People lined up outside banks and changed notes. Cars and bicycles reappeared. Fuel became partly available. Suddenly, there were parts for machines. The Marshall Plan shipments from the United States became visible. Coal and foodstuffs, steel and machinery all arrived to augment the battered base. The American Office of Military Government files for 1949 show a confident set of numbers, machinery shipments, tonnages of steel, dollars spent. In this arithmetic of supply, old expertise becomes valuable again. The factories that had shifted to war production now require engineers and clerks. The municipal water services need men who know the valves. The new Federal Republic, founded on 23 May 1949, needs a functioning bureaucracy. Employment becomes a bargaining chip. The mathematics of Reconstruction require the reintegration of many who had been categorized as compromised. Carl's story follows this pattern. He is a son who grows between two ledger books. In 1949, he is 20 years old. He has been a courier for the Red Cross. He has watched his father come home from hearings with humiliation and with a briefcase. Heinrich, reduced to a Mitläufer on paper, is accepted back into the office as a technical advisor. In 1951, he gets a position as an assistant at the Stadtbauamt. The city writes a small notice in the Hanover Weekly. Former municipal staff return to service to assist with rebuilding. It is perfunctory. It is also a public claim that the city is moving forward. Karl takes a job in 1952 at the same building on Stintelplatz. He is not an engineer. He is a clerk. He becomes, slowly, the keeper of ledgers. His hands, at 23, are steady. He learns to file. He learns the logic of municipal restitution. He learns that the town will not, for the present at least, pursue the men whose signatures exist in brown ink in the files. They are needed. Instead, the town offers an unspoken contract. Men like his father will be kept in their places, their denazification status noted, their salaries cut for a time, but their hands will remain within the machine that rebuilds sewers and houses. Carl's private feeling is not only shame, it is a type of cold calculation. He watches his father process requests for emergency housing for expellees. He watches the father stamp forms and then stamp again to reassign back pay to a local veteran. He watches the father use his old contacts to find housing for a former colleague. He hears the father say, in the evenings, words that add arithmetic to grief. "We keep the city running." That is worth something. We cannot lose it for idealism. His father's notebook records amounts. His father's papers decide who eats. The arithmetic of that decision is cruel because it translates the past into present survival. Public memory is re-scripted. School books, commemorations, and the radio. By the early 1950s, the curriculum in state schools has new phrases. The post-war generation is taught a simplified moral map. School books emphasize the suffering of bombed cities. They teach the recent past in images of ruins, of mothers, of missing fathers. The textbooks for history compress 1933–1945 into a pedagogical shape that focuses on Nazism as a political aberration, on the heroism of troops who fought, and on the injustices of expulsions. They are careful with the language of perpetration. The names of concentration camps are taught in the same register as the names of battlefields. The books enumerate the suffering of German civilians with long captions and black and white photographs. The mathematics here is rhetorical. The balance sheet of national injury lists more rows for air raids and expulsions than for organized deportations. Public commemoration follows the same line. On Volkstrauertag, the nation's day of mourning, the official orations mourn the dead of the homeland, often without naming the victims of a systematic regime whose policies had produced many of those listed. A Hanover City brochure from November 1950 instructs local officials to invite expellee representatives to the next town ceremony. The ceremonies thus become, in time, a recipe for unity under shared victimhood. But denial does not erase the contact points. DPs remained close to towns long after formal cleansing was supposed to end. In late 1947, a British report notes an instance in which Jewish DPs from Bergen-Belsen set up a cooperative bakery a few miles from Hanover and managed trade with local grocers. Some Germans traded with them. Some avoided them. Some avoided them. Some used their services while never speaking of the camp's purpose. The politics of memory is also legal. Restitution claims filed in the late 1940s and early 1950s are complex. Survivors submit claims through allied compensation offices. The municipal registry calculates property and ownership using old ledgers that sometimes contradict one another. Heinrich's files once again come into play. He has signed over the registration units that later are disputed. These legal quarrels are small. Local wars are small, local wars over identity and over the precise arithmetic of what had been taken. Cold War recalibration, security, and priorities. By 1948–49, Cold War logics reweight the decisions in the occupation files. American occupation policy shifts from total denazification to the containment of communism. A Memorandum of 15. February 1949 from the American military government states, the Soviet threat compels the utilization of all useful administrative personnel. Denazification must not impede the creation of a stable, non-communist state in the West. The phrase contains the arithmetic of geopolitics. The scale of justice is shrunk by the scale of the threat. Men like Heinrich become disposable in rhetoric, but indispensable in fact. The result is a policy of reintegration. Former NSDAP members become civil servants, industrial managers, mid-level bureaucrats. The Bundestag elections of 1949 produce a government that depends on conservative stability as much as it depends on social reform. The West German state takes responsibility for its people's social needs and, in doing so, also takes on the administrative personnel necessary to deliver those services. Karl feels this as a pressure. He is young and modern. He helps issue identity cards. He helps issue permits for construction. He sits behind a counter and watches people argue over allotments of coal. He reads Spruchkammer files in a light that is half curiosity and half self-protective distance. He reads the lines his father left. He reads the margins. Personal lives run like threads through the public folds. Karl falls in love with a woman named Ursula, who volunteers at a DP canteen. Their courtship is half public and half silent. Ursula has seen photographs and some of the DP files. She reads them like other people read the weather, predictably, with an eye for the storm. She asks Karl questions that he cannot answer. He answers with a kind of municipal arithmetic. My father kept lists. He also kept the keys to waterworks. It is not a moral deflection. It is a fact. It is a way to say our survival was built on formality. School and local culture keep people from talking about certain things, but they do not stop names from emerging. In 1951, a former forced laborer recognized Heinrich on the tram. He spoke angrily. A short report was filed at the police station. The Allied authorities noted the disturbance, and the municipal file notes it too. Disturbance at tram stop. Former forced laborer confronted municipal official. The municipal authorities, keen on quiet, paid a small compensation and arranged a transfer to a quiet office in the suburbs. The incident was never publicly discussed. The press kept its eyes elsewhere. Systems of silence persist because they are useful. They are practical. A town that re-employs a technical specialist saves money. A municipal water plant runs without interruption. The mathematics of stability reduces the cost of moral accounting and sometimes replaces it altogether. The denouement is not a single revelation. It is an accumulation of small truths. In the late 1950s, Germany is changing. The Wirtschaftswunder accelerates. Factories expand. The city builds new housing estates in the outskirts. The Marshall Plan's machinery is now complemented by German industrial initiative. A knitting factory on Lindenstrasse reopens as a textile plant with new looms. Karl's colleagues become foremen. His father retires with a small pension. The municipal office files a notice that he had become a long-serving civil servant, retired. But retirement is thin. The reputation in the neighborhood is not entirely healed. The family is tracked by whispers in cafes, by the occasional dropped postal card. Natalia Rosen, a DP who later settled in the United States, returns to Hanover in 1958 to look for her family's house. She finds a building with a new facade and a municipal sign that lists a street number. She goes to the records and requests the registration file. In the municipal database, she sees a signature she recognizes. It is Heinrich's. The page is stamped with the date 10 July 1942. The signature is small and enclosed. She looks up. She sees Karl at the desk. The meeting is recorded in an oral history. Karl writes in his notebook, "She looked at me as if the paper and I were the same." Natalia's testimony is quieter. He had the look of someone who was not surprised to be seen. The municipal filing clerk is an office and a person. They are both nexus and buffer. The union of them is what permits a post-war life that is both ordinary and haunted. The pedagogy of forgetting is institutional. Public schools do not teach much of this. The third-grade textbook of 1956 shows black and white images of rubble and of mothers carrying babies. The caption reads, "Our cities were destroyed." The second edition, printed in 1958, adds a paragraph about refugees. It mentions the need to welcome those who have lost everything. It does not mention the registers that had recorded the movement of Jews into transports. The second paragraph mentions those who acted wrongly and skirts detail. Public commemoration is also sanitized. In 1954, the city erects a plaque for victims of war and tyranny. The plaque's list is vague. It reads, "To the memory of those who suffered." There is a deliberate ambiguity here. Such phrasing equalizes suffering without assigning agency. It is a civic consensus designed to quiet angry claims, to permit integration, and, more prosaically, to allow a new national identity to emerge, which conspicuously avoids the detail that might unmoor it. The result is generational. For Carl's children, history is compressed into an historical paragraph. They learn that their grandparents endured hardship. They learn to be proud of rebuilding. They do not learn the specificity of signatures. They learn instead about national resilience. They inherit not only houses and salaries, but also omissions. Compromise is codified. The Federal Republic, by the late 1950s and early 1960s, codifies pensions, pensions for civil servants, restitution in limited forms, and the inclusion of former party members in the civic framework. The arithmetic that drove these policies is supplied by both need and fear. The need is to rebuild infrastructures quickly. The fear is of communist penetration. Between them, a political calculation squeezes the possibility of extensive purges. This is the broader frame of Carl's life. He is not a hero. He is not a villain. He is a clerk whose daily action is to file and to manage. He likes order. He dislikes the drama of accusation. He believes, eventually, in the fragility of social order. He believes that too much retribution can tip a city into chaos. He is also a son who sees the ledger close on faces and knows, in a private bone-deep way, that those ledgers were instruments of harm. There are moments of interpersonal reckoning that cannot be ignored. In 1961, a memorial committee in Hanover wants to create a small museum of local history. The proposal contains a plan for exhibits on local persecution and on forced labor. The municipal council votes. The proposal is curtailed to an exhibit on the suffering of the city. A small panel on forced labor remains, reduced and obscure. The files in the municipal archive show a debate heated for a day, then closed. An Allied Oversight Committee reads the minutes and writes, "Local politics continues to prioritize consensus." Carl attends the opening in 1962. He stands in a small crowd. He looks at the exhibits and pauses at a photograph of a line of women standing in a courtyard. The photograph is not captioned in detail. The list of who stood there is not present. Carl knows some of the names in the photo. He knows where their registry cards are. He thinks of his father's signature. He thinks of one woman in the picture who later emigrated to Israel and came back 20 years later to see the courtyard. Her daughter recorded in an oral history, "I went to the city hall. They showed me a file. They showed me a signature." She felt the presence of the signature like a physical object. It made a wound. It also made a structure. The complexity of memory is visible in such encounters. Nobody in the municipal office thinks of themselves as the perpetrator of a great crime. They think of themselves as necessary cogs. Yet some of their cogs assisted the engine of human destruction. That is the paradox. The Cold War's shadow lengthens. In 1963, the Bundestag debates amnesty for minor political crimes during the Nazi period. The logic is again pragmatic, to maintain a functioning polity and not to overburden the courts. The debate is circumspect. The arithmetic again wins. Karl grows older. He fills in forms, and then he destroys some of them as his office protocol demands. He knows that some papers disappear. He knows that paper is not a neutral medium. Paper erases. Paper speaks. His own handwriting is a slow, careful script. He writes names into folders and later watches them travel to different shelves. He knows where certain pages are kept. He can retrieve a motion from 1942 on a whim. He does not always. He is human. He is also an actor within systems. Years pass. The 1970s bring economic stability. Reunification of Germany is far away. The grandchildren rarely ask how the lists formed. They ask instead about the garden. Memory attenuates, yet sometimes a name surfaces in conversation, a name from the 1940s that causes a small silence at a family table. The silence is a compass. It points to something that has not been acknowledged. Karl keeps a notebook. He writes in it now and then. He fills the pages with small records, dates, names, times when a file was requested, when an expellee came to town, when a DP came to claim a house. He writes with a mixture of guilt and methodical care. His sentences are precise. He writes in the same shorthand his father used. He learns, as any clerk learns, the power of the cross-hatched mark, the stamp, the date. In one entry from 12 October 1946, the line that opened this story, Karl writes the sentence that is both accusation and measurement. My father's papers still decide who eats. He writes it in pencil the night he learns the father has been offered a job again. It is dangerous because it names the mechanism by which new life is being purchased. It is dangerous because it names the trade. The story is not redemptive. It is not a moral fairy tale. It is a document of the slow, administrative afterlife of cataclysm. The violence of the wartime years did not end with the surrender. It seeped into paper and forms. It found its shape in rations and rooms, in the way that lists decide who receives a bed in a crowded pension and who does not. It is a civic arithmetic that assigns human need into boxes and then compounds those small decisions into histories. We must register the specific events and the papers that record them. They sit in the archives. They are a geography of ledger and stain. Spruchkammer, File 7643, Hanover Kreis, Minutes to October 1946. Heinrich Lang, categorized as Mitlaufer. Fine imposed. Rehabilitation clause activated. Signature in brown ink. Hanover Civil Affairs Report, British Military Government, 3 June 1945. Note: municipal staff remains necessary. Fragebogen received by Stadtverwaltung Hanover, July 1945. Question 7. Were you a member of the NSDAP? Answer: yes, since 1933. Question 19. Did you supervise forced labor? Answer: I supervised housing assignments. Bergen-Belsen DP Camp Ledger, August-September 1945. Lists of names and destinations for temporary resettlement. Allied reports. Contact between local population and DPs noted, sometimes positive, sometimes leading to confrontations. Municipal correspondence. Letter from Bauer Hans, 9 November 1945. Reply from Landrat's office, 23 November 1945. O.M. Gus Memorandum, 15 February 1949. Denazification must not impede the creation of a stable, non-communist state. Bundesarchiv bundles. Files on expellees, 1945–1950. Appendix. Estimated 12 million displaced persons of German origin. City Council Minutes, Hanover, 1954, vote on Memorial to War Victims. Decision, plaque to victims of war and tyranny. Debate minutes, we must not divide the city. Allied Intelligence Summary, October 1946. Cigarettes remain the local currency. Black market exists. Food shortages acute. The story we tell is the aggregation of these documents and the lives they index. It is an analytic story. It is also a human story. It follows the arithmetic of survival through wood and paper. There are personal testimonies that refuse to be reduced to arithmetic. Miriam Rosen's oral testimony from 1946 recalls a moment in which a municipal clerk, unnamed, handed her a small packet of lentils through the DP camp fences and said, "You will be fed." She later learned his name. She kept his card. She kept it like a shape in her chest, ambiguous, human, and small. She later wrote in a memoir that among the many forms of post-war life, kindness and bureaucracy were sometimes braided. It was possible for the same man to sign a document one day and hand bread the next. The coexistence of acts complicates our desire for clean narrative cat.